alert and act with wisdom. We call for the highest levels of restraint and ending hostilities immediately to prevent an expansion of the conflict and return to dialogue and negotiations, because this is the best and only way to overcome the current crisis, ensure sustainable international and regional security and peace. We also call upon the Security Council and the international community to shoulder their responsibilities and ensure an immediate end to this war, to prevent any escalation and push towards the continuation of U.S.-Iranian negotiations on the Iranian nuclear dossier facilitated by the Sultanate of Oman. Madam President, we reaffirm the need to respect the sovereignty of states and abide by the basic principles and norms of the UN Charter and international law, as well as the principles of good neighborliness and non-interference in internal affairs. It is also important to refrain from the use or threat of use of force. We stress the important role of the IAEA in promoting preventive security and preventing the targeting of nuclear facilities, because this poses grave humanitarian and environmental risks and is a threat to the safety and comprehensive safeguards regime. It also violates all international and humanitarian laws. In this vein, we stress the need to protect maritime security and maritime corridors in the region and address activities that threaten the security and stability of the region and the world, including the targeting of commercial ships and threatening shipping lanes and international trade, as well as oil facilities in the GCC countries. In conclusion, we urge the international community and the Security Council specifically to take swift and effective action to contain this crisis and support diplomatic dialogue in order to protect the safety and security of the peoples of the region and prevent further escalation. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter. We are cognizant of the crucial mandate entrusted to this organ pursuant to the Charter of the United Nations. At the same time, we reiterate our unwavering solidarity with the people and government of the Islamic Republic of Iran in these difficult times. Madam President, in response to the heinous attack perpetrated by Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was initiated on the 13th of June 2025, the member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter issued a special communiqué on the 14th of June 2025. That communiqué saw them express their unequivocal condemnation and the most fervent possible repudiation of large-scale attacks that today continue to be perpetrated against many sites in Iran. These have produced the deaths of hundreds of civilians, including women, girls, boys, Iranian scientists, university professors, and senior military officials. Some of them were targeted alongside members of their families while they were at home. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter fervently condemn Israel's deliberate attacks against civilians and areas populated by civilians in which millions of people reside. We underscore that persistent, systematic and widespread attacks as conducted against women, girls and boys, the infliction of grave bodily harm and military attacks against residential areas, civilian objects and property by Israel throughout the region, including their recent attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran, lay bare once again Israel's absolute disregard for any law or norm and the premeditated nature of these brutal crimes. Moreover, we condemn the deliberate attacks against senior officials and Iranian scientists. Moreover, we denounce Israel's attacks against the Natanz nuclear facility, one of the Iranian sites which operates under the safeguards and full oversight of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Against this backdrop, we member states express our grave concern at the fact that these brutal attacks and the damage resulting therefrom pose considerable risks regarding the release of radioactive material. That is a grave threat to the civilian population and the environment. At the same time, we express our concern at the fact that Israeli attacks continue to imperil civil aviation security in the region. Madam President, the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter underscores that these reprehensible attacks constitute a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter, as well as of the fundamental principles of international law. These include sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of states. These attacks also run counter to international human rights law and gravely violate fundamental rights, including the right to life and the right to health. What's more, these atrocious attacks constitute a flagrant violation of Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter, inter alia. Against this backdrop, we warn against the acquiescence and neglect of the United Nations and the international community in terms of failing to deal with the persistent brutal attacks of Israel in the region. We recall that a lack of action and a lack of measures against such grave violations on Israel's part will erode the rule of law internationally and will undermine the credibility of the multilateral system. At the same time, such inaction would normalize the perpetration of new atrocity crimes. That is something which is undoubtedly clearly unacceptable. We underscore that such flagrant violations of the United Nations Charter and the continued brutal attacks waged by Israel which constitute threats to regional and international peace and security, must be condemned unequivocally by all of us, including by this Security Council. In this connection, we also underline that the use of double standards and selectivity in defending the principles of international law, including the principle of the prohibition of use or threat of use of force, would only undermine the integrity and purposes of the United Nations Charter. That would set a dangerous precedent for the violation of laws. Madam President, the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter moreover underscores the fact that the Secretary-General has a responsibility to defend the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. He must reject the deliberate and flagrant use of force against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Director General of the IAEA also has a responsibility to promote the security and protection of nuclear facilities and to preserve the integrity of the IAEA's mandate. As such, he must denounce Israel's attacks against peaceful nuclear facilities in Iran. The Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter expresses its grave concern at the continued crimes committed by Israel, crimes committed to provoke and unleash conflicts in the Middle East. This has been demonstrated by their reiterated and grave violations of international law, together with their provocations and violations of countries in the region. These are events that demonstrate Israel's intention to exacerbate tensions on the ground and the fact that they are responsible for the consequences arising therefrom. To conclude, we wish to emphasize that it is incumbent upon all states pursuant to international law to refrain from providing aid or deliberate assistance to Israel in order to brutally perpetrate atrocity crimes against the Islamic Republic of Iran or any other nation of the region. At the same time, we point to the inherent right of the Islamic Republic of Iran to self-defense, this pursuant to international law. And we also point to the urgent need for the international community to demand that Israel be held accountable for all of their crimes against the Palestinian people and the region as a whole. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Madam President, we expressed from the day one our deepest concern at the dangerous escalation that threatens to destabilize the Middle East following Israeli strikes on Iran and Iran's response. Today, we reiterate a strong commitment to regional security, including the security of the State of Israel, and call on all sides to abide by international law, show restraint, and refrain from taking further steps which could lead to serious consequences such as potential radioactive release. The European Union has always been clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon and is concerned about the IAEA's recent report, based on which the IAEA Board of Governors found Iran in non-compliance with its legally binding nuclear safeguards obligations under the NPT. But lasting security is built through diplomacy, not military action. We believe that diplomacy must prevail. The EU spares no effort to reduce tensions and to find a lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, which can only be through a negotiated deal. Madam President, we, both EU member state ministers and the EU High Representative, have taken numerous bilateral contacts since the start of the conflict with all stakeholders, including phone conversations with our Iranian counterparts, to call on Iran to take decisive steps to return to negotiations and pave the way for a diplomatic solution. In this vein, the High Representative and the E3 ministers are meeting as we speak in Geneva the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs. The meeting began this afternoon and it is ongoing. We will continue to engage for de-escalation, and in view of a lasting solution, we're going to be the only solution bringing peace and hope to the region. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General for his sincere and guiding statement. I also thank USG Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Turkey condemns in the strongest terms the recent attacks conducted by Israel against Iran. These strikes constitute a manifest violation of the UN Charter, in particular the fundamental obligation on all member states to refrain from the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. We view the rapid escalation now unfolding across the Middle East with profound concern. Hundreds of lives have already been lost, and the risk for further bloodshed is alarming. Moreover, a wider regional collision will aggravate the risk of nuclear or radiological spillover and mass displacement, disrupt global trade and transportation routes, and imperil energy security at a moment of acute volatility. As a neighbor of Iran, Turkey reiterates the imperative of de-escalation, leading to an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy. In that regard, we will fully support the Secretary General's call for maximum restraint and stand ready to assist all efforts aimed at halting the violence. Madam President, Israel's deliberate strikes against safeguarded nuclear facilities in Iran are unprecedented. They contravene international law, the statute of the International Atomic Energy Agency, relevant IAEA resolutions, and a Security Council resolution. These attacks must immediately stop. By targeting such installations, Israel has consciously placed nuclear safety and security at grave risk, with possible radiological dispersion that would endanger human health, biodiversity, and environment far beyond Iran's borders for decades to come. The IAEA's verification activities inside Iran have already been impeded. It is also deeply troubling that a non-NPT state, which maintains deliberate opacity regarding its own nuclear capabilities, is attacking the nuclear infrastructure of an NPT state under safeguards. This recklessness strikes at the heart of the global non-proliferation regime, compelling all of us to reflect upon its wider repercussions. The international community, especially this august body, must therefore unite in urging Israel to accede to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear weapon state and to accept robust IAEA verification. At the same time, concerns regarding aspects of Iran's nuclear program should be resolved through dialogue and strengthened cooperation between Iran and the agency. Turkey has consistently underscored that a diplomatic process remains the only viable route to settle the nuclear dispute and has supported and facilitated efforts toward that end. We continue to believe that diplomacy is the sole sensible path forward, and we call on all actors in a position to do so to exert their utmost efforts in this direction. Madam President, beyond the immediate nuclear risks, the security ramifications of this conflict are extensive. Energy security, which is inseparable from the national security, is now under severe threat. Strikes in one of the world's most sensitive regions for oil trade risk supply shortages and extreme price volatility, while the resulting uncertainties undermine long-term investments in vital infrastructure in the region. Hostilities have already disrupted sustainable transport, pushing up container and shipping costs and straining global supply chains. The destruction of urban areas and the natural environment further threatens biodiversity and jeopardizes regional and global sustainable development objectives. Madam President, we must not allow the crisis in Gaza to fade from the international agenda in the shadow of these latest events. Israel's assault on Iran cannot obscure the ongoing crimes being committed against the Palestinian people. Indeed, Israel's continued occupation of Palestinian territory remains the root cause of many conflicts across the region. A just, lasting and comprehensive peace is attainable only through the recognition of an independent, sovereign and contiguous state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. International community must therefore press with urgency for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Gaza and Iran alike, and redouble efforts to implement the two-state solution. Imposing peace is no longer a mere option. It is an imperative to preserve the credibility of the UN system and to safeguard the international law. Failure to do so will only fuel a vicious cycle of violence and war. Madam President, this Council must act collectively and decisively to prevent further escalation. The risk of wider conflict, forced displacement on a massive scale, and irreversible environmental harm demands our immediate attention. Turkey stands ready to contribute constructively toward any initiative that will de-escalate tension, restore the ceasefire, and relaunch credible, meaningful diplomacy. Let us seize this moment to reaffirm our shared commitment to the UN Charter, to the global non-proliferation regime, and to the principles of peaceful dispute settlement. Only by resolute adherence to these norms can we hope to avert catastrophic consequences for the Middle East, for the international community, and for next generations. Madam President, I touch on the spillover effects and this in Iran. Of course, UN staff is not immune from that. To the knowledge of this Council, 45 UN staff has been evacuated to Turkey from Iran. This shows also that this Council must. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.